again. So all these papers that you're doing, they definitely will help you in the future. Also, any undergrad papers that you did, you definitely need to bring them up to the graduate level, but they can be a really good starting point for coming up with ideas, for even just brainstorming for other ideas. But then also you want to choose something that's exciting to you. So for me, I know that I want to work, and also populations, so you want to consider populations. I want to work with Latino students in a high school with a lot of immigrants and refugees. So in my, any poster that I do or any presentation I do, a lot of that has to do with the topic that I find interesting: Latino students, underserved populations. And you know, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be the population that you're working with. Like right now I'm working on, for TLPCA, I want to do a presentation on the connection between trauma and autoimmune disease. That's nothing related to Latinos, but it interests me. So it's really just what you want to do. Okay. So this is the big part, because ultimately, as a grad student, it's really intimidating to come into submitting a conference proposal, especially if you didn't do it in undergrad, you have no previous experience. But also, there's not a lot of information specific to counseling proposals. They're more scientific. You see more of the psychology or psychiatry, which it just has a different language they use. It might look a little different. And so I'm going to break it down for you, so hopefully it helps. Okay, so first and foremost, I mean, you probably would expect, it's going to ask for a bio statement and a title. You want to make sure that it's very clear, it's not too long, and it gets to the point without giving too much away. So I gave a couple of examples of ones that I did, one with Dr. Wilson, so school counselor role in facilitating communication with Spanish-speaking parents. That's very clear. That's you know, what school counselors can do to help Spanish-speaking parents work with school staff. And then Dr. Wilson's breaking down walls for Latino students with disabilities. You know that it's going to be all about Latino students with disabilities and working, how school counselors can work through that. And then bio statement, it's very basic. It's your name. You're putting that you're an EDS candidate in what department, at what institution. They might also ask for your experience related to the topic. Sometimes you might not have any experience, and that's okay. Okay, and then it's going to ask you to choose the format. At first this was very overwhelming, especially not knowing what I could apply for, what proposal I was supposed to submit. So, because you have your traditional presentation, you have a lecture, poster presentation, paper, all that. But when you think of conferences, most people think of a presentation or a lecture. They're about 45 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes. That's a big gap, but it just depends on the conference. And it just kind of follows that normal format, so introduction, presentation, discussion, but it's not usually students. However, you do have the opportunity, if you like your professor and if they like you and they know you're interested, they might allow you to help them and co-present. Not saying that it's a guarantee, because they are very busy people too, so they might not be presenting as much as maybe you need. But you have the opportunity to do a poster presentation. So this is very friendly for graduate students. Usually the people that you see doing poster presentations are people getting their master's, EDS, or their doctoral students. It also has a really wide gap for how long these are. Some are 30 minutes, and you just have people walk up to you and they ask you questions about what you've researched or just what you know about the topic. Sometimes you're there for an hour and 20 minutes, which sounds really overwhelming maybe if you're not comfortable with that time and people coming up to you and asking you questions, but it's really not that overwhelming. You basically just talk about what you're interested in and what you've learned. I also recommended, this was something that Dr. Wilson told me about. She was like, bring something to hand out, because that at least gives you like a buffer, and you say, oh, look at this, and this is great, and now you can remember who I am and my research. I handed out like Latino candy, like spicy chili candy, so they could remember, like I'm talking about Latino students. Yeah, and it's just a great opportunity. Sometimes, a lot of times they're judged, so you will have judges come around and ask you questions, which can be intimidating, but usually they're just regular people. They're professors or counselors, and they're just everyday people with just more experience than you. Okay, so this is not, I don't see this very much in the counseling world, but I still want to mention it. This is just a paper presentation where you literally stand up in front of people and you read your paper. You're probably not going to do this, but it's helpful to know what it is so you know probably not to choose it. Same with workshop. You're not usually going to be a student doing a workshop, but it's just something that's very interactive. Usually it's a smaller group and you just kind of sit around and do an activity or do something very hands-on. Again, you're probably not going to do it as a student, but when you graduate, you might. And same kind of concept with roundtables and panels. So panels are more formal versions of roundtables, but usually there's like one theme and multiple speakers. Panels usually are a little bit smaller, but they usually end with like a Q&A. Again, you're not going to pick this one. You're usually going to pick the poster. Okay, so now, past format. This is probably the most important thing with conference proposals. This is what you're going to see on pretty much every conference proposal that you do. Each conference proposal will vary based on the organization hosting the conference. The wording might look different for each one, but you're probably always going to fill out something like this. So a program summary, a description, information that you're going to cover in your topic. It's usually pretty short, depending on what the format you choose is. So here I say 5 to 6 sentences, based on their guidelines. And usually it's only about 200, but then for the poster presentation that I did for TCA, it was less than 50. So sometimes that can be difficult to condense all of that information that you want to convey in your presentation in such a small amount, but it's definitely doable, which is why I give you an example. I'm not perfect, and this is not a perfect example, but I think it's helpful to see an example of a summary that is counseling focused. Because sometimes the ones you see are random things that don't necessarily match up with what you're learning, and it can be hard to see how that wording is different from the wording you might use in counseling. Same with, so there's a presentation synopsis. That is similar to the summary, but it is much longer. So it's pretty much anything you can't fit in that summary description, and you're just expanding on it. So you might have some of the same information, but it's going to be elaborated on. So usually it's about 250 to 300 words. Sometimes it's as long as 500, but those are usually the bigger conferences, which you probably won't be submitting as much to. However, I did, so on your second packet, if you want to take a look, there's something with my name, really large watermark across the front. That's an example of a presentation synopsis that I did. Again, it's not perfect, but it's definitely an example of a student work. And that one's about 275. So you can see it looks pretty long. So imagine writing 500. Okay, so in the beginning I talked about the summary description and how that you're probably going to see most of the time on conference proposals. Same thing with program objectives. You might not necessarily see this synopsis, but you will definitely see the description and the program objectives. Usually these are 3, they're very short, and they're measurable objectives that you're going to write. And they have a very specific format usually, so following this presentation, participants will be able to, and then you insert a verb. So they will be able to understand, identify, explain, something along those lines. They will be able to explain something related to your presentation. So an example I have, this is actually the one that we did with Dr. Wilson. Following this presentation, participants will be able to understand Latino culture related to education and disabilities. So it's just bringing it back to what you want them to know at the end of your presentation. Okay, and then miscellaneous. A lot of times you'll see stuff like this, and sometimes it'll be worded differently, but it's the same kind of idea. So you see I have content, but then I also have categories, content areas. So on one of the presentations I did, content referred to what does the literature say about this topic that you're researching? What does it have to do with counseling? But with content areas, it's more about how does it align with like in BCC standards. ASCA, if you're doing something related to school counseling with Scally, you will have another list of content areas that you'll apply. But it's basically you just clicking everything off and seeing how it relates to your topic. You might also talk about the target audience. It might be fellow counselors, it might be fellow graduate students, and then also equipment needed. Sometimes they just tell you this is what you're getting. Sometimes they give you a choice. Most of the time, more times than not, they'll just say you got to bring your own poster, tripod. But you know, sometimes you're lucky. Okay. So that is the basic format, and I know I gave you a lot of information, so hopefully the handout will help. But on that second handout that I gave you, the one with my name across the front, I also gave you some examples of my poster that I submitted, as well as some proposals from Out Purdue. They're not counseling related, but it's still helpful to see. I know that this presentation is mostly about just submitting the proposal, but sometimes it's really difficult after you finish to understand what a poster looks like, and so that's why I included it. I just use PowerPoint, and they have a format, and if you want, I will totally send you mine if you ever want to do a poster presentation to get a better understanding, because it can be very difficult. And then finally, that last page in that handout is going to help you pay for it. So I did not realize when I first did my first presentation in the program that the College of Education will help you pay for it. They'll give you up to $500 over the course of, I believe, like an 11-month span. And I believe it's only one time, so maybe use it on a big one. But I think it's super helpful because posters can definitely be expensive. Maybe not in like the real world, but as graduate students, they're expensive. Blueprint does them for about $51. That's the most affordable. I know, Amanda, you told me yours was like $80 at Kinko's. Yeah, yeah, and they can go up to $100. So those are my little tips. Not to divulge too much from what we're talking about, but yeah, hopefully that is helpful. And then, any questions?
Clarification with the funding. You said College of Education. Is that College of Education or Graduate Studies?
I believe it's College of Education. Somebody will correct me if I...
And is it for the expense of the poster or for travel?
It looks... Oh, Graduate Studies, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Graduate Studies. From what it looks like the breakdown that it will include poster, it's more about if you travel to go someplace, but I think you could make the argument if you're traveling more than 30 minutes. I think somebody told me that it would be covered because they have done it before. Yeah.
And the other thing I'll mention is that oftentimes the conferences, not only do they offer student posters, but they offer volunteer opportunities as well. So you can almost double dip into getting not only a reduced rate for as a student, but then you get even a further reduced rate as a volunteer. So that's certainly a way to help with the expense as well. All of the conferences that you've mentioned, TLPCA, TCA, Scally, they all offer volunteer opportunities. Scally in particular, and for those of you who may not be familiar, School Counselors and Administrators Leadership Institute. That sounds good, right? Scally. They we have in the past been the provider for the CEUs for Scally. And so they come to us first for their volunteers. So there's always that opportunity, which is at the beginning of September. Somebody you know is in charge of the TLPCA conference, and therefore their volunteer opportunities. Okay. And TCA, we've had a lot of success with folks that have volunteered. I think that typically is an application process. Okay. I'll mention too that given what we're doing with our program and particularly the EDS program, and the fact that the school counselors are taking a lot of the same courses that the mental health are now, that I think it's, and that some of you are working for dual licensure, then I think you could consider both conferences as a focus, either mental health or school, because you can choose a general topic that could be related to working with kids that have trauma experiences or anything like that. And so TLPCA could apply for those of you who are doing dual licensure, or even for those of you who are not considering that, still, it's a good opportunity.
With the volunteering, what exactly do you do? What does that consist of?
It is mainly, they typically assign you some responsibilities, and a lot of times it is session management. So I can speak from TLPCA that the volunteers actually are the ones that do the scanning of the sessions to determine that folks have been there and can get their CEUs. Sometimes it's sitting at the registration desk. Sometimes they may ask you to come and do ahead of schedule and do filling the bags, stuffing the bags with things. So it can be a wide range of things. Most of the time, I would say that the commitment is anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, and the cost can be something like $25 to attend the entire conference, and sometimes it can even be less than that.
And you'll send something out. Say when you need
Yes,
volunteers.
yes, for both student posters and volunteer opportunities. But anytime that we get information, we always post it on the listserv, whether it's Scally, TCA, TLPCA, even some of the national conferences we'll try to send around, and they are in fun places. I think ASGW, Association for Specialists in Group Work, was in Puerto Rico back in February, I think. Is that right?
It was January.
January, okay. Not a bad place to visit, right? Of course, we're only going, TLPC is, you're only going up the road to Trevecca, sorry. Yeah, or it could be really close, yes. The other thing I'll mention is that I know that the TCA does not provide easels,
Yes.
and we have them that we can lend out. TLPCA does provide easels. So just little things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing is too, is even though I've given you a lot of information and you can probably figure out your best resources are the professors. I go to Dr. Lee and ask her questions about TLPCA. Dr. Wilson helps me with all of my proposals. I mean, don't drive them crazy, but definitely respect their time, but they're more than willing to give you feedback on whatever you're trying to do. Any more questions?
So do you usually have your topic fully researched before you submit a proposal? Or is it kind of like you get a little bit into it and then once you propose, you do the rest of the research?
It depends on which topic that I'm doing. Sometimes no. Like the one I talked about, trauma and autoimmune, I know a lot about it because we've studied in our classes and read The Body Keeps the Score, but I'm not doing enough that I could do a full paper tomorrow. But I still research a lot. Yeah. Why are you?
I'm curious. I'm curious because I'm thinking about it. I don't know like how much I need to have done before I submit a proposal, or if
Yeah.
it's like all of it and then propose, or like get most of it and then propose.
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest tip is truly understanding what you want the audience to know, and so marking that out based on as much information as you need to get to that point. But obviously, you're going to have to do more to do a full presentation, but don't overwork yourself to submit a proposal that might not get accepted.
Right.
Just as a full-time graduate student, you might not have the time to do that. However, if you do start with an already existing paper or idea that you've already researched, that's definitely helpful.
Thanks, Taylor.
Can I throw in my 2 cents?
Yeah.
So I've done a poster presentation too, and I'm a big fan of not doing more work than you have to. So I use the paper a research paper that I've written for school, and use that as a basis for a poster presentation. So, why do twice the work? That made it a heck of a lot easier to put together a poster presentation. And conferences are really cool, really fun to go to. I learned a lot. Went to several sessions that day too.
And I think the myth may be, and sorry if you talked about this, I was moving the camera. It does not have to be research-based. It can be an idea. It can be information that you're sharing. Like you are just sharing information. And so I think that where that can work that you've already done, as you've mentioned, and interest. But I think that if you have an idea and you feel like it's a solid idea and you feel comfortable sharing information, then you don't have to have it done. I mean, think about what she's talked about. The description is probably one of the key pieces because that's what tells the reader, tells the attendee what you are going to be speaking about. And the title helps too. And I thank you for talking about the title and being specific. I can't tell you how many times people have terrible titles, okay? And you don't be cute, be specific, okay? Because I have been to many presentations where I sit down and it's not what they say that they're talking about, or they clearly are not prepared and didn't really do the work to be able to share the information that I was looking for. Some conferences don't have themes anymore, so it really is just open to whatever. I mean, the theme might be like mental health or school generally, but I'm like you, I wouldn't get too worried about the theme, but just go with your interest and make sure that when you are going to be talking to someone that you feel comfortable enough to share information. That's going to be the goal. Right? And I'm not sure if you mentioned this too, but oftentimes there are prizes, so there can be money associated with it too.
Yes. Another way to fund your poster is to win. Yes. Oh, also, so I don't know if I mentioned, the example that I gave you, typically in counseling, presentations that you're doing are more of literature reviews, at least on the level that we're at. So the example that I gave you, it's just a simple literature review that I did and turned it into a poster. And it doesn't take as much as I think. I think it can be very intimidating trying to apply for conferences or present at conferences. They're really not. They're really just gathering information and telling other people about it. Any other questions?
I went to the library, I think it was the writing lab, had the presentation, and it was about posters. It was before I knew, it was at the beginning of the semester last semester. And they showed like something similar to what you presented. So I guess this question may be for her though.
That's
Is
okay.
it something that we can, I don't remember everything from the little presentation, but is this, what she's talking about, something we can take over there
Yeah.
and y'all can help?
Yes, we absolutely can help work on poster presentations.
Any more questions? All right. Thank you for sitting through this.